So, it has been about a month since the Nintendo Switch 2 launched. I got mine on the midnight release. You should go watch the video that I put out for that. So, I feel like I've had plenty of time to rest with the console and give my full thoughts on it. The games I played, made specifically for Nintendo Switch 2, have been Mario Kart World, Cyberpunk 2077, Fortnite, and the Street Fighter 6 demo. I didn't buy the full game. I don't really care enough about Street Fighter to buy it. A couple of games got Nintendo Switch 2 upgrades, where they would essentially run better on the Nintendo Switch 2. And out of the ones that came out, the ones that I played were Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, and Splatoon 3. I have not played as much Splatoon 3, but I did compare it between the Switch 1, and it does run much better. In Super Mario Odyssey, this is actually the first ever time I did a full playthrough. I played it on Nintendo Switch 2, because I think for the last 8 years, or at least ever since I got the Switch 1, I've been asking for this game for Christmas, and I never got it. So I finally just was like, fuck it, I'm gonna buy it. I bought it like 6 months ago. The Switch 2 got announced, so I was like, okay, I don't even want to play this right now. Or like, I just had it in my collection, and I was like, I'm gonna play this one day. And then I didn't until the Switch 2 came out. So I can't really compare it to Switch 1, but the game did run great there. And Breath of the Wild, that also ran great. I don't know anything about Tears of the Kingdom yet. I've heard that one runs phenomenal. And one of my complaints with Tears of the Kingdom is that some areas did have lower performance. So I think just having that upgrade for the Switch 2 is probably the best thing for that game. And then a couple of Switch 1 games that got no updates. Really the only quote-unquote improvements have just been loading times, and they're still like not amazing, like such as Risk of Rain 2. This game, it runs really well, but like loading into the game, holy shit, it goes from like taking 30 minutes to load to like 10 minutes to load. It is still terrible load times there. And if you've been watching my streams, you know that I've been playing Deltarune, and like this technically does have a Switch 2 like copy for it, but I wouldn't really count that as like something made specifically for the Switch 2, because like this game isn't going to get any boosted improvements running on the Switch 2. It's a pretty simple game. It ran perfectly on the Switch 1, so I'm just going to consider this as a Switch 1 game I played on Switch 2. I played the start of Final Fantasy VII. So far, I'm not really caring about that game. I never really have been into turn-based RPGs. Really, the only ones I have liked have been Amori and Persona. Then I've also played Persona 4, Arena Ultimax, and Stardew Valley. There have been plenty of other games that I have played. Like, most of these here I have played for a little bit, but like, the ones I list are ones I've played for like a significant amount of time, and I can actually say something about them. For the console itself, the screen is 1080p, 4K in the dock, and it's just an LCD, which people were complaining that it's not an OLED. Who the fuck cares? This screen still looks phenomenal. Like, obviously, like, an OLED looks a little bit better. For the price increase this thing would have gotten if it was an OLED, I am fine with this being an LCD. Again, it still looks phenomenal with the HDR built in. The Switch itself does run in 120 Hz, but so far, the only game that I know that runs in 120 Hz is the Welcome Tour, which I'm not buying that. And Metroid 4 is confirmed that it will be able to run at the full 120 Hz. So, even though this thing does have a really good screen, most games you're only going to see it run at 60 FPS. At least for now. It has 256 gigabytes of internal storage, and it does have micro SD Express support. So if you download a lot of games digitally, you will have to get more storage down the road. There's no avoiding that unless you want to only have like 5 games installed in your console. That's why I prefer physical, because I'm a fucking snob. And like, although the cards, they are expensive, some of them can go faster than SSDs, and I'm sure there is a valid reason why Nintendo chose to use those instead of normal SD cards, so I don't have any complaints about that. At least for now, I'm not going to get an SD card because I don't really play a lot of games digital. Well, I guess for like Nintendo, I buy more games digital on here than like my PlayStation. Like PlayStation, I play almost exclusively physical games, but with the digital key cards, which I'll get into later, it's going to be a little bit harder to do on here, but we'll see how we go. Like, a lot of the games that I buy digitally are either just cheap or games like Stardew Valley that I love, but like I'm not going to carry a cartridge around for. But I'm personally not going to get a storage expansion until 1 terabyte cards become readily available, because I don't think I want to have to worry about storage space that much. I would rather just spend the extra money to have more storage and really never have to upgrade and get like a 256 gigabyte card just to run out of space on that and then have to buy another one later. The speakers sound great. I haven't had any problems with them. The microphones, they sound fine, I guess. They're not phenomenal. I don't think anyone really expected something great. They sound about the same as like the PS5 controller mic, which, yeah, that's what I fully expected. But, you know, you can still just like plug in your own headset if you really don't like the built-in microphone. And the battery, from my experience, runs at about 2.5 hours when playing a game like Cyberpunk, or about 6 hours when playing just about anything else. I feel like the battery life will highly depend on what game you're playing. If you're playing more heavy-hitting games like I said, Cyberpunk, possibly Street Fighter, plenty of other games, then yeah, it's going to drain your battery a lot more than like fucking Persona 3 Portable or the SNES Nintendo Online. And when I was playing Mario Kart, I timed it based on my own experience. I played from the same at 100% all the way down to 0. And Mario Kart lasted about 3 hours, I would say. So if this is going to be something you're using mainly for its portability, like you're traveling a lot, so that's why you want to get something like this, you're probably going to want an external battery, because like this thing's not going to last like a full like plane ride or something like that. Now, the Joy-Cons, they are much bigger and they feel much more premium than the Switch 1 Joy-Cons. Like, just for a comparison right here, the size is night and day, really. And the rumble is most definitely improved in these than the Joy-Con ones. And the mouse controls feel great. I'm using like a carpet here, so I can't really like sew them off great, but the mouse controls feel pretty good. Although, I will say, like, I think my theory was right. If you're going to be using this for, like, 30 minutes tops, your hands are definitely going to cramp. So, like, outside of, like, Mario Party and using these for, like, mini-games or whatever, you're probably not going to want to use these for a shooter game like Fortnite or Cyberpunk. But, you know, the option is still there, and if you're a kid with smaller hands, maybe you won't have as big of an issue. And the mouse controls, they do obviously work in games like Cyberpunk and Fortnite, but from what I can tell, they do not work in any Switch 1 games. They're only going to work for games made for the Switch 2. And I'm sure you would have guessed this if you have a brain, but it does not work on glass tables because, you know, the sensor can't pick up anything. So if you're a family that has a glass coffee table, have fun using your toys. And one of the big things that they were teasing for a while, the C button. This obviously is just for game chat. I don't think it's very necessary to have a whole button for this, really. You could just, like, they could have just done a thing where, like, you double tap the home button and it would, pop up the game chat menu from there. But just having a whole dedicated button doesn't really make sense for it. Now, you can go into accessibility and change the button to wherever you want, but, like, what are you going to change the C button to? Like, an extra screenshot button? I guess you can turn it off, but, like, I don't see why you would want to turn it off, I guess. Like, if there's not really going to be any other thing you can use this for, you may as well just keep it at GameSat. Now, for how the games perform on this console. Cyberpunk has 2 modes, quality mode and performance mode. In quality mode, the game looks a little bit better. Honestly, not too much of a difference in my opinion. And you get 30 FPS with that. In performance mode, you get mostly 40. But a lot of times in like crowded areas, like if you're in Night City doing missions, the frames do drop. The lowest I think I saw it go was about 25 FPS. But even in performance mode, you're still going to average at about 30 in these types of areas. And in the dock, the game does run at 1080p, but it only runs at 720p in the handheld, which is kind of what I've expected. Still, in comparison to the Steam Deck, this was clearly somewhat optimized for the Switch 2 and does run better than the Steam Deck. But, like, I feel like it would have been better if, like, they had, like, an option for performance mode where it would actually just, like, tank down the graphics a little bit more, but you would get the higher FPS because, like, playing a first-person shooter with the low frames can be kind of annoying, I will admit. Gyro aiming, I will say, does help. And luckily, Cyberpunk is not the hardest game out there. But I still think the game looks fine in a lot of areas. I think the graphics are stunning. It's really just like the frames that it's kind of holding back this version. Although they do have a bunch of features made specifically for this version of Cyberpunk, such as like gyro controls or the touchscreen or whatever. And I will say, I've noticed that the Switch does get a little bit warm when playing Cyberpunk. Nothing too bad, I would say, but like warmer than any other game that I played. Mario Kart World runs at about 1080p, 60 FPS handheld, 4K in the dock, and it does drop to about 30 FPS when you're doing 3 to 4 player split screen. I have a whole video talking about Mario Kart World specifically, so if you want to go check that out, go ahead. I would love more views. And Fortnite, with its quality, obviously it's a little bit lower than PS5. It's not fair to compare this thing to a PS5. Obviously, it's a fucking handheld. People that are trying to compare this to a PS5, I think, are pretty stupid. The two are not comparable. It's just not a fair comparison. It's like, here, let me compare the 3DS to, like, the PlayStation 3 or the PlayStation 4. That's not something you can compare. They take up two entirely different spaces in the gaming industry. One is for home gaming, one is meant for more portable gaming. Although this is technically still a home console, you cannot put it in the same category as an Xbox, a PC, or a PlayStation. But Fortnite, the quality is lower just a little bit, but it is very close, I will say. Like, when I first loaded it up, I had to load up Fortnite on my PS5 also to do a comparison because, like, they looked damn near close in quality. And just that alone, I still think it's very impressive. It runs at about 1080p, 60 FPS, and there is no, like, lower quality 120 FPS mode that, like, Xbox or PS5 has. All Switch 1 games essentially just run faster. Super Smash Bros., for example, is almost an instant load when getting into the fights compared to having to wait like 10-15 seconds on the Switch 1. And like, unless a game got a specific update for it, like Super Mario Odyssey, Splatoon 3, don't expect anything aside from just faster load times, because they're not made to run at the higher resolution. They're made for the Switch 1. You're essentially just running it on the Switch 2. It's going to be the same quality. Like, Persona 5 Royal, for example, it looks exactly the same as it does on Switch 1. On Switch 1, on this small little thing, if I'm correct, it runs at about 540p, being upscaled to 720p, I believe. And on the small screen there, it looks fine. But on this, it looks fucking horrible. I gotta admit. Like, it's like running, like, I don't know, like a PS2 emulator on, like, some, like, hella nice, like, PC. Like, it's not going to look as good. So don't go into it expecting that all your Switch 1 games are going to be upgraded, because they're not. Unless a specific update was put out for it. I don't know many third parties that have put out updates yet, but, like, to be fair, the console is a month old. Give it a year. I guarantee a lot of, like, big mainline games are going to get updates made for the Switch 2 so that they do run better. Like Risk of Rain, for example. I am sure that game is still, like, fully in active development. Give it a few months, it's going to have a Switch 2 version. Probably, honestly, I could see again an update with the next DLC. And, like, Mortal Kombat 1, I have not played Mortal Kombat 1 on the Switch 1 or Switch 2, but, like, that was, like, one of the worst looking things ever to come out on the Switch 1. And the Switch 2 version looks exactly the same. It essentially just runs better. It just doesn't have, like, all the frame drops. It loads fast, but, like, the graphics and models still look like mashed potatoes. It's terrible. But, you know, games that actually got the update for the Switch 2 or were made for the Switch 2, those run phenomenal. And those are the ones that you should consider with the console. Obviously, the pros of this is a much more premium console. It's comfortable to use. And aside from Cyberpunk, every single game I've played on here has been perfectly stable. And this actually does feel like a current-gen console. Because for the longest time, Nintendo has always been, like, a step back in the console race when it comes to performance. Obviously, they would keep up with their exclusives and whatever gimmicks they would do with their consoles. But even though this obviously is still not as good as a PS5 or Xbox, that line is getting shorter and shorter with each console. And honestly, I feel like we're getting to the point with PlayStation and Xbox where how much better are you really going to be able to get? The PS6 is probably going to go to like 8K. I'm pretty sure the PS5 technically goes to 8K, but like almost no games supports it from what I know. But the PS6 is going to go to 8K. It's probably going to be consistent 120, maybe 240 FPS for most games. But aside from that, the graphics are not going to get much better in my opinion. So it's going to be maybe 1 or 2 more generations to where Nintendo is 100% caught up with PlayStation. But that's also not really going to matter because Nintendo has never really cared about better graphics. They cared about making fun, good-looking games with... They prioritize art over realistic graphics, which is what I've always preferred with games. Now, for some of the cons of the Switch 2, I want to make note first, just like I did with the Mario Kart video. I do have plenty of cons that I can go into detail about for the Switch 2, but that does not mean I think the console is bad. It's just because I think talking about the bad stuff and going into detail about it is a lot easier than going into the good for a lot of things. Like, if you follow me on Letterboxd, which I don't advertise that much, but I am on Letterboxd, I'll throw a link in the description. If I ever see a good movie that I like, there's not really anything I'm going to say about it aside from like, oh, this was good. I liked how the cinematography looked. I liked the ride and stuff like that. I'm not going to say anything about it because I don't have anything to say aside from it was good. But if you take a bad movie that I watched, I will probably write a few paragraphs on why I think it's bad because it is a much easier scene to talk about. So I just want to get that in mind. I still think this is a phenomenal console. Honestly, it's probably one of my favorite consoles at the moment. There is going to be a lot I'm going to talk about with the stuff I don't like about the console. And the first thing, blatantly, as you can tell with, like, I only have 2 games for the Switch 2, I do not like the game keycards. To defend them, they are the only cartridges available aside from 64GB cards. And I don't think it's fair for the developers to be expected to buy a 64GB cartridge for a 3GB game. That's obviously not worth the price. Anyone would just buy the game key card in that sense. And I think more sizes will be released as the console goes on. Like, I'm sure next year, maybe 2 years, we're gonna have 128 cards, 32GB cards, maybe 16GB, but I doubt that. And at least Nintendo first parties, they have already confirmed no Nintendo first parties are going to be using the game key cards, and that was probably one of my biggest concerns with it. I still don't really like the game key cards because I think that's the next push forward to an all-digital gaming environment, which I don't like the idea of. I prefer having physical games, not even because of like the whole ownership issue, but just because I like the novelty of like having like the booklet and like the whole cartridge and everything, or the disc. I just like this more than this. Now, for certain game companies and just certain games in general, I don't think there is any reason for them to be using the game keycards aside from making more money. For example, Street Fighter 6 is 48GB, Hitman World of Assassination is 58GB. There's no reason that those could not have been on a 64GB cartridge, aside from the fact that they make more money if they just put the game download on the cheaper version of the cartridge. And that's one of my worries with the future with these key cards. But like, the future is still like hard to say. They for sure are not going away. Flat out, they are not going to go away. In fact, stuff like this has existed for PlayStation and Xbox for a while. Just to make one example, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, most modern Call of Duties, you may notice down here, requires content download. Some of the game is on this disc, I will say. Not the entire game. There are some games like these where you cannot play them unless you download something through the internet, which is not really something I've ever been fond of. I prefer just having the game on the cartridge because it's gonna for sure be there as long as I always own the game. I don't have to worry about potential servers getting shut down in like 15 years and then that game is kind of just a hunk of scrap unless I want to buy a brand new like remaster, remake copy of it. So I think for that reason, keycards are not going away. We're going to see them for the foreseeable future. And obviously they're a much cheaper option, so developers, especially bigger ones who just want more money, are going to lean towards game keycards more. And I do think it is like a good option for any developers that can't afford the big cartridges for like their small games. But reportedly, the game keycards did sell horribly because no one really liked the idea of buying a physical game that does not have the game on it. So people are just going to go and buy the digital copy anyways. So maybe that will be like a deter away from using the keycards for a physical release, because like, okay, we're going to spend money to put these games out on shelves, but no one's going to buy them if we put them on the keycards. We may as well try to fit it on the cartridge. That's like some insane cope, but that's my hope. We are either going to see 90% of third parties using the game keycards, and we can't do much about that, or developers will see that no one really likes the game keycards and will take the initiative to actually make physical releases when different sizes get released to get more sales in retail. I can see both paths very possible. Honestly, with the way the industry is going, the first is probably most likely, which is disappointing. My biggest concern with the keycards, though, is what's going to happen in 10, 15, 20 years when support for the Switch 2 is going to be long gone and the servers for, like, the eShop is going to be shut down. How is it going to work if you put the keycard in here? Is it still going to be able to download the game, or is it going to be practically unusable plastic? Another concern I have is, how is it going to compare in about 5 years with how it will perform? I personally don't care. I was still playing on my Switch 1 until the very end, like with mainly indie games and Nintendo first parties and stuff. But like, it was very notable that after the first 5 years, that this thing was very... It obviously was not as good as its launch. And that's just because games got more advanced, so like third parties were not going to run as well. And the Switch 1 used pretty limited hardware. But like, I also don't expect games like GTA 6... Call of Duty Modern Black Ops 9 to run at a perfect 1080p 60 FPS. But, like, my primary concern is how will first parties run? The Switch 1 later in its life, around the last 2 years, was not very good in performance. We all know this. I'm not going to say Tears of the Kingdom ran horribly, but in my playthrough, there were plenty of spots where the FPS dropped a fair amount. And I feel like the game could have overall ran better if they just waited 2 years and put it out on the Switch 2, which, you know, to be fair, they did make an upgraded version of Tears of the Kingdom for the Switch 2. Or, for another example, with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, that ran like absolute garbage. Now, that could be blamed on Game Freak because it is very obvious that they do not give a fuck about the Pokemon franchise comparing it to their other games, because even with the Switch 2 upgrade, this game still looks like dog shit. But I feel like for the Switch 1 version, a majority of the blame can still be pointed at the Switch 1. Because, like, at least, even though it didn't look great on Switch 2 when it got the upgrade, it at least performed well. The point I'm getting at is a good amount of the first-party games during the last 2 to 3 years of the Switch did not run as well as they could have. And yeah, that's to be expected. Hardware seemingly gets outdated faster and faster now. But comparing it to any of the older consoles from any of the big three, their consoles could still stand their own ground even with the new console being out. The PS4, aside from having like a very loud fan, could run plenty of the PS5 games pretty damn well. I think the first game that like PlayStation put out as a first party that did not run on the PS4 was Spider-Man 2. And that came out like, what, 2 years ago? So we had 3 years of like PS5 games still coming to PS4. They all still ran fine, from what I remember. My concern is how will it be towards the end of the Switch's life? Will it follow the same fate as the Switch 1, where games made for it can barely run? Or will it be kind of like most other consoles, where like the console is still able to last into the new console for a couple of years? But yeah, that's kind of like my overall thoughts with the Switch 2. Spent $500 on this thing, midnight launch. I love this thing. It is one of my favorite consoles so far, and I am so glad that I sat in line for 3 hours to get this. Would I recommend picking one up? I mean, that's entirely on you. If you know you're going to get games for this in the future, then yeah, just pick one up now if you can. But like if you don't really care for the games that are out right now, just wait until like a game that you want comes out and then buy it, and I'm sure you'll eventually pick up the other games and be fond of those. You know, that's the Switch 2. I tried going for a mainly like objective route with this saying like what this thing can and cannot do. If you like the video, feel free to subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers and a certain amount of watch hours so that I can make passive income off this channel. The channel's been growing a lot lately, and I thank you all for that. I also want to note with the little carpet saying, it is inspired off Scott DeWaz with his second channel, Scott Stas. I just really like the carpet idea. I did not copy the color of the carpet on purpose. That's the only carpet I could find. I stole this from my grandparents' house. And this just happened to be the color of it. I do plan on buying an entirely different color. But like for Lawn or Golder Folds or videos like these where I'm just like kind of holding something, talking about it, whatever, you're going to see a lot more of this carpet background. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Feel free to subscribe, and I will talk to you all next time. Good night.